Today we'll be discussing groups and organizations. We'll first start off by defining what a group is. A group is a collection of at least two people who interact with some frequency and who share a sense of identity that's aligned with the group. We need to make note that not every gathering can necessarily qualify as a group. You have to have the three factors of two or more people, an interaction that occurs with some frequency, and individuals who hold a shared identity. We then transition to this concept of an aggregate, or you could use the term crowd. And an aggregate is when people exist in the same place at the same time, but may not necessarily interact with some frequency, or may not necessarily have a shared sense of identity. When you think about an aggregate, think about waiting in line at Starbucks. You might arrive at Starbucks Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. You might see the same individuals in line, and you may wave at them or smile at them or say hello. You don't necessarily have consistent and frequent and meaningful interaction with those individuals. You don't necessarily have a shared identity with those individuals. Therefore, the aggregate would not qualify as a group. And then we can look at the concept of a category. And a category is essentially when a gathering of individuals share similar characteristics, but are really not tied together in any other way. Think about the term millennial, individuals born between 1980 and 2000. Sure, they may share similar birth dates. Perhaps they may be friends with other individuals, but as a whole, not all millennials interact with frequency, and not all millennials share a sense of identity or shared sense of identity. It's important to note that an aggregate or a category can become a group. Let's look at this example of a natural disaster, for example. You may live in a neighborhood that may qualify as an aggregate. You may look at your neighbors Monday through Sunday when you're walking to your car, waving at them, saying hello, exchange a few words here and there, and that's the extent of the relationship. You may live in a city such as San Pedro or Montebello or Monterey Park, and that can qualify as a category. And then a natural disaster occurs. And everyone goes to the local Red Cross center that's from your neighborhood. They wait till the natural disaster ceases and it's safe to return home. They begin to rebuild their lives, and they make a decision that we have to be prepared next time. So what begins to happen at that point is you have weekly meetings, perhaps every Thursday night at 7 p.m. At those weekly meetings, roles and responsibilities are provided to individuals. Some individuals are in charge of taking care of the elderly, others the pets. Others are in charge of getting water and food supplies. Well, we've seen the evolution from a category, being a resident of San Pedro, for example, to an aggregate, living in a neighborhood, let's say 5th Street, to now evolving to a group, because now you have two more individuals, everyone who attends the meetings on Thursdays at 7 p.m. You have frequent interaction, communication that's taking place at the 7 p.m. Thursday meetings, and you have the shared sense of identity. First, being the survivor of a natural disaster, and second, being part of this organization. And we can call it, let's say, the San Pedro Relief Organization. We look at primary groups, according to Charles Cooley. And primary groups play a very critical role in our development of self. Primary groups are relatively small. They're typically made up of very close family, very close friends. Individuals are engaged in face-to-face interactions that fulfill some type of emotional need. In other words, primary groups serve an expressive function. In addition to primary groups, we have secondary groups. Secondary groups tend to be very large, very impersonal. They're not there to meet our emotional needs. Instead, secondary groups are designed to be task-focused and time-limited. They serve an instrumental function. Let's get from point A to point B within a specific period of time. To better illustrate this concept, let's think about a group project in your sociology class. You might work with individuals that were randomly selected that you maybe have never had a conversation with. You exchange phone numbers, email addresses, perhaps social media accounts, and that's primarily how you communicate with one another. At the conclusion of the month of working on that project, the relationship ceases. In this particular scenario, these individuals only made up a group to get the project done and to get the project done over a month period. Now, it's important to note that primary and secondary groups have the ability to change. And an individual that belongs to a secondary group can now eventually evolve into an individual who belongs to a primary group, and vice versa. Let's revisit that example of a class project. As I mentioned before, you exchange different forms of communication, and you find that even at the conclusion of the project, you actually really like hanging out with this person. Well, a relationship develops, a friendship or a romantic relationship as a result of working on this group project. In this example, we can say that the secondary group evolved into the primary group. We look at in-group versus out-group membership. And in-groups are people in an in-group are members of an exclusive club. In this exclusive club, individuals have favorable characteristics, or characteristics that are deemed favorable, I should say, that have been established by group members. They intentionally exclude other individuals that leads those individuals to join the out-group. The out-group are individuals who are deemed unfavorable. The out-group are individuals who do not have certain characteristics that the in-group members have. And as a result, this can create competition. This can create disdain from the out-group to the in-group. What we want to take into consideration is that in-group and out-group membership can lead to cliques forming with the intent of excluding particular groups of people. And people can be discriminated against, people can be excluded from group membership for a variety of reasons. For example, people can be excluded on the basis of sexual orientation or race or ethnicity or age. They can also be excluded because, well, you don't have the latest and greatest brand of clothing. We're the athletes and you're not. The members of the in-group get to determine, to an extent, what the qualifying factors are for group membership. We look at a reference group. And a reference group is essentially a group that people can compare themselves to. Reference groups shape what we wear, what type of music we listen to, how we spend our free time, right? How we compare ourselves to others largely shapes our behaviors as human beings. The media can serve as a reference group. We may see individuals who want to copy the attire and the behavior of a celebrity that they worship, that they celebrate. We also explore this concept of dyads and triads. Dyads are essentially groups made up of two people. Triads are groups made up of three people. And if one person in the dyad leaves, that group ceases to exist, because in order to have a group, you have to have two or more people. However, in a triad, if one person leaves, you can still maintain that group because you still have two people. Now, what's interesting in the dynamics of a triad is that relationships can significantly impact how that triad operates. You may have individuals who may team up 2 against 1. You may have an individual who has grown frustrated with person A, therefore, he or she will team up with person B. It can be detrimental to the existence of a group and the productivity or the effectiveness of a group if those type of dynamics develop. We also look at this concept of large groups versus small groups. And large groups are very impersonal in nature, right? Large groups typically will elect some type of leader to lead them, while small groups are very personal. There's a sense of cohesion, right? There's a sense of connection that exists. And in small groups, you may have an informal leader at times, but really many small groups don't reach that point. Now, as we start to go through groups and group leadership, what we want to take into consideration is the fact that the concept of leadership refers to an individual's ability to develop a vision, to establish a goal. And we're going to look at instrumental leaders. Instrumental leaders are individuals who are goal-oriented and who are largely concerned with accomplishing a set of tasks. We also look at expressive leaders. And expressive leaders are concerned about the emotional well-being, the emotional strength, the emotional health of the people that they're leading. They're there to provide that pat on the back. They're there to provide that support that an individual may need. Now, we also want to take into consideration the fact that within these various leadership functions, we also have leadership styles. We have democratic leaders, individuals who look for group participation in the decision-making process. Now, they can do that for a variety of reasons. A democratic leader may elect to engage in group participation in the decision-making process because he or she may want to be inclusive. He or she may use other people's opinions to influence their own, to show that their team is valued. On the other hand, a democratic leader may be engaged in those type of behaviors because if something goes sour, something goes wrong, they could wipe their hands clean and say, look, I didn't make the decision, the group made the decision. Therefore, it's the fault of the entire group as opposed to one individual. Now, one of the challenges that's associated with democratic leadership is that it's very time-consuming. It doesn't allow for a tremendous amount of flexibility, especially when rapid or executive decisions have to be made. We look at laissez-faire leaders, and those are individuals who take a very hands-off approach. In laissez-faire leadership, you expect your team to be able to self-manage, so that if you say we have a deadline in a month, your team is able to get that project done in a month. Now, laissez-faire leadership requires an individual to have a strong, highly motivated team, because if you don't, some individuals may drop the ball. Some individuals are not self-motivated enough to lead themselves. So they may need a leader in place who can provide the support, the resources, the guidance, the timelines on a consistent basis. Then we look at authoritarian leaders. And authoritarian leaders issue orders. They assign tasks. Authoritarian leaders basically say, we need to get from point A to point B to point C in this time frame, and this is how we're going to do it. Authoritarian leaders will step in when need be to get a task completed. They're focused on the success of the task at hand. We look at this concept of conformity. And conformity is essentially when individuals comply with group norms and group expectations. In conformity, it's twofold. As leaders, we want individuals to conform to the vision and to the mission of the institution. But at the same time, conformity can pose a threat because it can stifle innovation and creativity. It can lead to complacency among team members. We also take into consideration this concept of formal organizations, large organizations, such as the healthcare system or the government, schools, for example. And we're going to look at this concept of bureaucracy. I want you to think of bureaucracy as the framework for an organization that has certain similar characteristics or components of it that you'll find regardless of what organization you're going to examine. Think about it in this way. If I was to ask you to imagine a car, not all of you are going to imagine the same color or size or make or model of the car. but there are going to be some shared characteristics such as tires, doors, steering wheel, seats. Well, bureaucracy operates in the same way. We're not going to have the exact same bureaucratic system established across all organizations, but they are going to have some similar characteristics that are shared. We look at this concept of normative organizations, and those are voluntary organizations. And normative organizations are based on shared interests, these emotional connections that people find rewarding. You might volunteer at a local soup kitchen. You may volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. And those are normative organizations, right? There's some type of emotional connection, some type of joy that you get from volunteering. We look at coercive organizations, and those are organizations where people are pushed, coerced, or forced to join. We can look at rehabilitation centers. We can look at the criminal justice system. We can even look at the military, that even though the military is volunteer, once you're in the military, you are forced to adhere to military code, to the military standard of living. We also look at utilitarian organizations. And those are organizations that provide a specific reward. And we can look at education, for example. An individual enrolled in Sociology 101 may not always be there just for their own enjoyment or personal fulfillment. Being in Sociology 101 provides a reward. And that reward is passing the class, earning the 3 units of credit, being able to apply those credits towards a degree and or transfer. Now, we're going to revisit a bureaucracy. And a bureaucracy consists of 4 characteristics: the hierarchy of authority, a clear division of labor, explicit rules, and impersonality. And the hierarchy of authority refers to essentially a chain of command. Does everyone understand that a manager has a manager, and that manager has a manager, and that manager has a boss, and so on and so forth? This chain of command helps provide vision for the organization, helps provide accountability for the organization. We also look at the clear division of labor. Does everyone understand their roles? That if you're working, for example, in a McDonald's, you're in charge of the fries, you're in charge of taking orders, you're in charge of the drinks, you're in charge of the chicken nuggets, you're in charge of the hamburgers. Everyone has to have the proper training in order to carry out the tasks associated with the roles. Then we look at explicit rules. Are the rules written down? Are the rules standardized? Are the rules outlined in a handbook, for example? So there's no confusion. Right? Explicit rules maintain control over the organization and employees' behavior. Then we look at impersonality. You take your personal feelings out of professional situations. It limits nepotism. It limits favoritism. This idea that we are going to make decisions that are in the best interest of the organization as opposed to the best interest of individuals. Now, ideally, a bureaucracy would be a meritocracy where people are rewarded, promoted, hired for their documented skill sets. Now, that may not necessarily always occur, but a bureaucracy tries to provide that opportunity where things are done correctly, right? Where things are done, once again, in the best interest of the organization. Now, bureaucracies are designed to be more efficient, to create equal opportunities, to ensure that the maximum amount of people can be served at one time. And sometimes in some organizations, very rigid hierarchies are absolutely needed. Individuals need to understand that chain of command. Now, we think about the negative aspects of a bureaucracy, that they can be so rigid that they stifle, once again, innovation, that this can actually decrease productivity and efficiency, that the workplace is constantly evolving, and bureaucratic organizations historically have been very slow to evolve with the changing times, or to change with the changing times. Now, Michel's offers this concept of the iron rule of oligarchy. And it's this idea that organizations are controlled by a few elite individuals. Now, we're going to revisit that concept when we talk about media later on in this course, but you want to take that into consideration, that power may be held in the hands of a few. And those few may have one perspective of the world that may not necessarily be consistent with the views of others. We look at the McDonaldization of society. And the McDonaldization of society is essentially this idea that societies become more efficient and more productive if they focus on efficiency, right? The division of labor. Does everyone know their role? Predictability. If I go to one McDonald's in Burbank and another McDonald's in San Bernardino and another McDonald's in San Pedro, will the Big Mac look and taste the same? If I walk into a Target in one location or a Costco in another location or a Walmart, will I easily be able to find the products that I'm looking for? We look at calculability. Do we know how much it costs to produce this product to the very last penny? And most organizations that are effective do understand that. And then control monitoring. Right? Do we have security cameras in our store? Do we have explicit rules that control what employees can and cannot do when they're at work, or how they assemble some type of product?